Welcome back to the Last Days Book Club, where we are reading the book today entitled Dwelling in the Secret Place by Sonica Veith. This is an ebook available for free online at clashofminds.com, where you can download it and read along with us. Sonica Veith is the spouse of well-known evangelist, lecturer, university professor and zoologist Dr. Walter Veith. And this true story is a chronicle of their life together, their ministry, their numerous trials, tribulations, and hardships, as well as their successes, victories, and triumphs. In our last reading, we covered chapter 7, entitled In My Father's Business, when the family returns to Somerset West for Walter to take up a new job. Sonica's family also live in Somerset West, and a family reunion was organized, but they found that they could not get along. Their transition to Adventism and their new beliefs were unacceptable to the family, and relations were strained. And then Sonica's father had an aneurysm and was hospitalized for many weeks. His wife, Merle, the New Ager, did not take care of him when he returned home, and Sonica took him to live with them so she could care for him. He had developed serious bed sores and was generally in very poor health, having also lost a few toes to gangrene. During his time with them, he healed and gradually felt much better. Then one day, after a few weeks with no warning, Merle showed up at their door to take her husband home. One day, her dad asked Walter to come and help him clear out some books and take them to a friend's house. It turned out that the friend was the master channeler for all of Africa and boasted of his achievements and acquaintances with many heads of state and world leaders. He thought Walter was one of them. Soon after this, her dad and stepmom decided to return to Hermanus, where they previously lived, and when they went to help them pack and move, they left quite a mess for Walter and Sonica to clean up. But among the rubble, Walter found many precious esoteric books, which gave him insight and evidence for his lectures exposing the works of darkness and secret societies. Missing were the works of Blavatsky, a contemporary of Ellen White, but the evil antithesis of the spirit of prophecy, with her work being inspired by demons and published by Lucis Trust and rated as the Bible of the New Age. Walter wanted this book for his research and evidence of the spirit world of darkness. By taking a chance and returning to the home of his stepfather's friend, he was able to get the book, which he has used in his lectures combating the world of darkness and bringing thousands of people into the light of the truth. Also in this chapter, Walter joins Uncle Frenchy, Francois Duplessis, at a church in Paro, and together they conduct many an evangelistic series, which grows the church and allows a strong relationship to develop between the two families. As that comes to an end, the Veiths find themselves again with no job, no place to live, no money, and a mountain of debt. Once again they pray, and God works in their lives. Walter gets a call and is offered a junior position at a Cape Town university. They finally sell the farm and dispose a portion of their debt and go to their knees again to see what God has in store for them next. Dear listeners, please download this book for free at clashofminds.com and read along with us as we pick up the story today in chapter 8, entitled Growing in grace. 2 Corinthians 12 and verse 9. And he said unto me, My grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. With a sigh of relief, the children and I watched as Walter turned the key to the front door of our Paro home for the last time. We had cleared the house of our last possessions and were glad to leave the busy city and move back to the country atmosphere of Somerset West. The children were looking forward to attending the rural primary and high schools situated on the college grounds and surrounded by forests and green meadows where Bambi-eyed Jersey cows were grazing peacefully. Because Walter now had a permanent position at the university, he was able to get 100% bond on a house, and we decided to buy a small old house near the railway line. Just like his humble position at the university, we had to start from scratch again with a humble home for our family. It was the cheapest we could find, and very neglected, but it had a nice garden with a majestic oak tree and a little stream running along the south boundary. We were so excited about having our own home again, and I couldn't wait to start renovating and doing some vegetable gardening. Since most of our salary disappeared into our bottomless pit of debt from the farm, we were still struggling to survive. It took 15 grueling years before we were rid of the debt that we had incurred through that unfortunate episode. Now, our old Volkswagen bus was living on borrowed time, and we needed another car desperately. Walter's only solution seemed to buy a car with a good engine and a bad body, then build the good engine into a similar car with a bad engine and a good body. Walter's brainwave didn't seem so complicated at the time, but it turned out to be really hard work. Every evening after work, we drove almost 50 kilometers to Cape Town, where a friend offered to keep the scrap cars in his backyard and help us transfer the engine. We worked till late at night to transfer windows and other good parts from the one car to the other. And after many hours of frustration and bleeding fingers, we proudly looked upon our handiwork. Our metallic, red, rust-free Audi with its powerful engine purred all the way back to Somerset West and received its honorary position in the garage. It had become so much a part of us, we felt like sleeping in the garage to keep it company. Walter continued to do some evangelistic work together with Uncle Frenchie and started building up a formidable series of lectures by using mostly slides he had photographed himself. Some days, we didn't have the money to develop the slides for the following lectures. And without having told anyone about our problem, someone would unobtrusively slip some money into Walter's pocket after a lecture. Great was our surprise when we discovered that it was always exactly the amount we needed, not more and not less. But one day, we had come to the point where we had no money to buy even basic food. It was lunchtime, and the aromas from the neighbors' barbecues drifted temptingly through our dining room window. As we sat down around our beer table, 3 worried faces were watching us intently. Walter started to pray and thanked God for everything he had done for us so far, and then proceeded to thank him for providing the food for this day. What food? I saw written all over the children's faces. But just as they were about to complain, the phone rang. "Have you been to your front door?" a lady asked with a secretive voice. "No, I don't think so. We came in through the back door." "Why?" I answered. "Well, maybe you should go and look, and have a very blessed day." I hastened to the front door and opened it. It was the prettiest sight I'd seen in a long time. There at the door stood a huge box filled with fruits and vegetables and bread and other edible goodies. "Look what someone left at our front door," I said as I placed it on the table. "Ooh," every mouth breathed in unison. "That's just what you prayed for, pup," our daughter laughed. From very small, all our children called us Mum and Pup, and up to date, none of them are called by their given names either. But how that came about is too long a story. And we did have a very blessed day. We had food for a feast that day, and enough to last us till the next bit of money came in. During this time, we were involved in a series of lectures that Uncle Frenchie was presenting in a small town called Parle, some 60 kilometers from Somerset West. Before the lectures started, the local little church had to be prepared and trained to help during and after the campaign, particularly since new people inevitably joined the church after such a series. Walter was sent to give some Bible studies to the members who had slipped into such a state of complacency that they hardly believed anything anymore. One evening, he did a study on Daniel with the small group. There were only a handful of discouraged older folk and one younger family. The younger man stubbornly opposed him on every point, which brought back his hitherto suppressed feelings of indignation. "How on earth is it possible that you call yourself an Adventist and you don't know these things?" he asked agitatedly. Then with greater fervor, he continued to smother the poor man with facts. At the end of a very long and heated Bible study, Walter stopped and looked around at the small circle. There was silence. "No more questions?" he asked, but no one dared say a word. Then someone shifted slightly, carefully summing up the situation, much like an intimidated male praying mantis would approach his cannibalistic female partner. Thank you for your enlightening study, Dr. Veith. I would, however, like to point out to you that our young friend here is not a Seventh-day Adventist. This was his first Bible study." Oops, Walter thought, thoroughly embarrassed by his faux pas and impetuous behavior. But by the grace of God, instead of his approach having an adverse effect, the man, after a few Bible studies, became convinced of the truth and attended the lectures and church regularly. We know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. Romans 8 and verse 28. Given his history, this was rather astounding, for he had opposed the message for many years, making his poor Adventist wife's life a misery. He was renowned for throwing Adventist pastors out of his house and even bombarding them with dangerous objects. We later learned that his original purpose for attending the Bible studies was to disrupt them. But eventually, he became more amiable, and a few years later, ended up studying theology and entered into the ministry. The rest of the older church members were, however, quite happy with the status quo. One lady even prayed at the end of one of the Bible studies that God would please not send any new people from the meetings into the church, because that would be too much trouble for them. The following Sabbath, Walter had to take the service at the church. Because he intended to use the time to give the members a preparatory lecture, which would be longer than a sermon, he had planned to start a little earlier. Just before he was to start the lecture, Uncle Bob got up and came to the front. He said he just had a quick announcement to make. But it soon became evident that the almost 90-year-old had forgotten his original mission and started telling some unrelated anecdotes from the archives of his well-lived mind. Walter was sitting on the edge of his seat behind the pulpit, looking constantly at his watch. Since he didn't want to interrupt and seem disrespectful to the older man, he prayed silently that God would take the situation into his hands and solve the problem. The next minute, while the unsuspecting brother was still speaking, one could hear a few clicking sounds as his braces shot loose, releasing his trousers, which fell like a stone to the ground. He stopped in mid-sentence, grabbed his pants, and quickly walked out. Walter felt a little embarrassed himself, for he hadn't asked for such drastic measures, but was relieved to be able to continue the talk without further interruption. We wondered if we would ever meet that mischievous angel who unfastened the old man's braces. Just after the commencement of the public lectures in the town hall, the minister of the dominant local church, the Dutch Reformed Church, sent out a pamphlet to the residents of the town, warning them against the lectures and propagating lies and misconceptions about the beliefs of the Adventists. Uncle Frenchy personally visited the minister to correct him in his allegations, showing him in the Bible what it is that we believe. The man was at a loss for words and agreed to correct and retract his misinformation the following Sunday in church. Although undoubtedly some damage was done, most people were not deterred and started streaming into the town hall, tentatively at first, but then more boldly as they heard the messages they had never heard before. 3 to 4 times a week, we were bundled into the car to drive the distance to Pearl. Our children had become accustomed to sleeping in lecture halls and in the car and keeping themselves busy. It was exhaustive work, working against constant opposition from uninformed mainline church leaders whose members started asking them very uncomfortable questions. Most well-meaning Christians had been following their ministers blindly, believing that their churches were founded on the Bible alone, or out of fear for their church's frightful Rome-inspired doctrine of hell. Now, they were learning that their so-called Protestant churches were no longer protesting against Catholicism, but were propagating the same unbiblical doctrines without questioning them. Round about this time, I had a dream which seemed to reflect clearly the work God had set aside for His church in this misguided world of endless deceptions. I dreamt we were moving into a new house, but as we opened the front door, my heart sank into my shoes. The floors of the whole house were covered in a thick layer of mud and dirt. "We can't move into this house," I exclaimed almost in tears. "We'll never get this place clean." For a moment, Walter shook his head pensively. Then he said slowly, "We can try." "There's no point. We'll never finish the job. It's too much work." I started sobbing. But then Walter handed me a shovel, taking one for himself also, and started digging into the dirt. "Let's just do it," and see how far we get," he said. I sighed, for his life motto, "Just do it," has often landed us in hot water. After hours of painstakingly slow labor, we could feel some hard surface below, and we worked harder and faster to see what we had found. Through the muddy streaks, we saw that we had dug down to the floor tiles. I fetched a rag and polished a patch clean, and as we stood looking with amazement at the beautiful tiles, the sun cast its golden rays across the floor, causing the tiles to sparkle like precious gemstones. I was so excited that the work no longer seemed hard and wearisome, but enjoyable as we continued to work together. I woke with a smile and told Walter what I had dreamt. He commented cynically. "Seems like the story of our life, always shoveling dirt." But the more we thought about it, the more we realized that this had indeed become our work, especially for Walter with his insatiable, inquiring mind to expose and discard error and uncover the beautiful hidden gems of Jesus and his eternal truth so that everyone can see it. It was a hot, summery day when Uncle Frenchie went out to visit some of the interested attendees of the meetings. At one of the homes, the husband was very interested and asked for more information. But his wife refused to even bring the tea she had made for their visitor into the lounge. With resentment, she set the tray on the floor outside the door to the lounge and then shouted that they must fetch it themselves since she wasn't willing to serve a member of that sect. After a while, her husband, in an effort to keep the peace, decided that it wasn't worth the pain and stopped attending the lectures. However, when the health lectures were advertised in town, she went, not knowing that it was Walter, a member of the same sect, who was the presenter. She enjoyed the lectures so much that she continued coming to the spiritual lectures, and soon she was convinced that what she heard was the truth. When she explained to her husband that he was right after all, and she was now ready to walk this road with him, he got very angry with her and threatened to throw her out if she joined this faith. One night, he wouldn't let her sleep with him in their bedroom, and she had to sleep in the spare room. Feeling rejected and confused, she started doubting her decision and wondered if she had gone mad. She cried herself to sleep, but soon she woke up, hearing someone call her name. She got up, and thinking it was her husband who had second thoughts, she opened the door to the main bedroom, but he was fast asleep. She went back to her bed, and once more she heard a man's voice call her name. Again she went to see if it was her husband who had called her, but he was sleeping. She checked the windows to see if it was perhaps her father or someone from outside, but there was nothing. The third time she heard her name, she was about to get up when she heard the words in her mind, "Keep the commandments of God." And she saw, as if in a dream, the 2 clay tablets with the 10 commandments descend from above. It was as if all the uncertainty and loneliness disappeared, and she felt strengthened and comforted, knowing that this was the truth after all. She decided to get baptized, but her life was hell at home. Uncle Frenchie, however, with the wisdom and tact of Solomon, managed to involve her husband in transporting some people to another baptism. Without saying a word, the unwilling man sat moping in the back row of the church. But after everyone was outside and the pastor was busy locking the door, he said sadly, "I have just missed my own baptism." Pastor Frenchy looked at the once hardened face of the man, now humbled by his conviction, and merely turned the key in the door once more and said calmly, "No, you haven't. The water is still in the baptismal font. Let's go back in." Those of us who were still there went back in, and many tears of relief flowed into the baptismal water as his resentment and resistance was washed away, and he accepted a new life with the Savior he had so long rejected. But the enemy was determined to hinder the working of God's Spirit in the hearts of many earnest souls. While the people were at the point of making their decisions to follow the truth, the president of the conference at that time, evidently dissatisfied with the strong messages that Walter was presenting, ordered Uncle Frenchy to terminate the lecture series and withdraw from the Parle area. Due to the follow-up work he was engaged in, the pastor nevertheless continued, but became, without revealing the soreness of his heart, severely discouraged under the onslaught. To crown it all, the dedicated pastor, with his unassuming frame, suddenly developed severe backache and was unable to even walk. But willing rather to endure the pain than give up the mission, he insisted to continue his work and eventually had to be carried onto the stage of the lecture hall by two men who sat him down in a chair behind the podium. He started his lecture by lifting himself up a few inches from the chair, his pained face barely visible above the podium. But as he spoke of the unsearchable goodness of God, his back grew straighter until he was able to stand without pain. After the lecture, his condition deteriorated again, and the whole procedure was repeated for the next couple of weeks. But there was still more to come. The church had planned a get-together, and all our new friends from the meetings were there. One of them was a German lady whose husband was furious that she had become involved with us and threatened to kill our meek little pastor. This wasn't the first threat he received, and he didn't take it too seriously until the man arrived at our function. He was a strong man and at least a head taller than Uncle Frenchy. As he got out of his car, one could almost smell the trouble. He stormed towards the unsuspecting pastor like a mad bull charging the matador, cursing and threatening him. The next minute, without warning, his powerful arm shot out towards the little man, his fist aimed right at his head. But before the punch reached its target, Walter lunged forward to protect Uncle Frenchy, and the blow struck him on the shoulder. It sent him staggering, but he managed to catch his balance and turned to face the irate man. Although Walter wasn't angry or contemplating any form of retaliation, he was much larger than Uncle Frenchy, and the surprised husband backed off without another word and returned to his car. We were thankful that Walter managed to protect his friend, although his shoulder was a little tender after the altercation. The wife continued to come to the church regularly, and although he made no further threats, the hostile man sabotaged her car, and she had to walk a fair distance to the church or get a ride with some of her new church friends. The battle for souls is a real one. For Satan will not easily give up those who once belonged to him. But Jesus died to set us free from the evil one's dominion over us. And he will never give up his lost sheep until the final awful decision has been made to reject the Savior's deliverance and free grace. Shall the prey be taken from the mighty, or the lawful captive delivered? Thus saith the Lord, even the captives of the mighty shall be taken away, and the prey of the terrible shall be delivered. For I will contend with him that contend with thee, and I will save thy children. Isaiah 49, verses 24 and 25. Unbeknownst to anyone at that time, more than 20 years later, that very same man who hated those who loved God above all things decided to follow in the same narrow road against all opposition and ridicule from his skeptical family and friends. One evening, we received a phone call from a very distraught new member at the Parle Church. "You'll never believe what just happened to me," he gasped. "I'm still shaking all over. I phoned Uncle Frenchy, and some crazy woman answered and laughed in a horrible voice. She said, 'I have the pastor just where I want him. I have finished him off. He's totally destroyed.' Who can this person be?" "Let me phone him and see what's going on. Maybe you had crossed the line. I'll phone you back," Walter offered to try and calm the man down. He dialed the pastor's number, and a strange woman's voice said, "I've got him just where I want him. Ha 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 ha. I've got him down on the ground." And she laughed so loudly, with her blood-curdling voice, that I was able to hear her clearly some 10 meters away. Walter put down the phone quickly and phoned the same number again. This time, Auntie Emma answered, and when he asked if the phone had just rung before, she said no, that was the first time it rang. She continued to tell Walter that her husband was very discouraged and sitting on the floor in his study. The opposition and criticism he encountered had depressed him so that he had no strength to continue any further. Then we knew that it wasn't just a crossed line, that Satan himself was gloating over the fact that he managed to discourage and burden God's servant so. Immediately, we drove the 50 kilometers to his house to pray with him and to encourage one another to persist and not to give up, recalling some of the precious promises from the Bible. Shortly after these incidents, the oppressing evil presence was at times felt in our family as well. One late night, as we drove back to Somerset West after the meetings, our car suddenly went dead at a particular isolated spot in the countryside and rolled to a silent standstill. It was pitch dark, and there were no farmhouses in the vicinity. Walter got out and peered aimlessly into the engine to see if he could find the fault, but without success. He fiddled with the battery and tried to start the car again, but it was totally dead. "The only thing we can do is to pray," he said, and then asked God to help us with our problem. The children were getting scared and cold as we sat huddled together, staring into the vast blackness around us, wondering how we were going to get back home. A few minutes later, the car suddenly started up and the headlights came back on again. All sighed with relief, and we continued our journey, the incident soon forgotten. The rest of the week, I stayed home with the children, who had to get up early for school the next morning. But the same thing happened to Walter as he was on his way back from the following lectures. At exactly the same spot, the car and the lights went dead. And sometimes, as long as an hour later, the car would start up again, as if nothing had happened. At first, we didn't think much of it, except that there must be some electrical fault. But after it occurred several times, at the very same spot, we realized that this wasn't coincidence. One evening, we all were driving along the same road after the weekend lecture in awkward anticipation of the notorious spot, when an even worse thing happened. We had slowed down to a snail's pace as we approached the spot, when we noticed a black dog crossing the road at the exact place. Walter slowed down even more, thinking that the dog would run in front of us, but it stood still, right in the middle of the lane of the oncoming traffic. In anguish, our children shouted as we noticed a four-wheel drive pickup approach from the other side. But instead of slowing down, it accelerated suddenly 100 meters away from the unsuspecting animal and struck the dog with the bull bars at breathtaking speed. The poor dog was flung high up into the air and landed in a mangled heap beside the road. I tried to get a glimpse of the driver, but couldn't see anything at all through the tinted windows as the vehicle sped away. We turned around and followed the car, but at the four-way crossing, there was not a trace of any vehicle for miles. It had disappeared into thin air. Our children were crying inconsolably, and all the way back home, I inwardly resented the way our joy and enthusiasm in doing God's work was being marred by the increasingly severe spiritual war raging about us. I felt like shrinking away from the constant conflict, especially for my children's sake. But my mind kept telling me to persevere. We still needed to develop more trust and faith in the powerful deliverance and endless love of God, so that we could be prepared for still worse to come. The Pearl Church started growing rapidly as more and more people accepted the beautiful Advent message. But this brought some new challenges. With racial tensions still rampant in the late 80s, especially in the smaller, more conservative towns, white and black or colored churches were still separate, and each ethnic group did their evangelistic work among their own people. During this campaign, however, people from different racial groups attended, and because we had built up a friendship and trusting relationship with them, they preferred to worship at the little church where we did the Bible studies and had our Sabbath lunches together. Among the new visitors were also some who were previously from a religious group called the Israelites. They were adamant that we shouldn't allow colored people in the church because they could not be truly converted, and having a limited education wouldn't be able to speak our language, to sing our hymns, or even dress, eat, or act the way we do. No matter how many Bible texts Walter and Uncle Frenchie showed them, where God commissions that the everlasting gospel be preached unto them that dwell on the earth, to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, as in Revelation 14:6, they nevertheless refused to listen. One Sabbath, Walter had to preach at the little church in Pearl. The church was filling up with the new members, both colored and white, and all were very excited to hear the word of the Lord. only a few grumpy Israelites were sitting in the corner furthest away from the others, casting occasional bitter looks across the congregation. A few minutes after the service had started, a black lady entered the chapel and sat down just a few rows in front of the children and me. All eyes turned inquisitively toward the well-dressed stranger with her pleasant expression and refined demeanor. When the first hymn was announced, the members opened their hymnals, but the newcomer started singing every word of every verse in the Afrikaans language without the hymnal, her clear, strong voice ringing harmoniously above the voices of the congregation. Again and again, a hymn was announced, and every time she knew every song and every verse off by heart. A strange hush fell upon the people, and then Walter continued with his sermon. After the service, Walter took his place at the entrance of the church to greet the people as they came out, nervously waiting for the stranger to appear so he could ask her where she came from. But no one saw her leave through the only entrance at the front of the church. We searched up and down the street and around the church, but she was nowhere to be found. Then it dawned upon us that God had again taken charge of a difficult situation himself. Those who were influenced by the Israelites softened their hearts towards their colored brethren, and the troublemakers soon left the church all by themselves. The Paul church and their colored folk became a strong bastion for the preaching of the message for many blessed years. But the close of the friendship that Walter and Uncle Frenchy had, and the spiritual union they enjoyed in furthering the gospel in Cape Province, soon came to an end. Uncle Frenchy and his wife had suddenly been transferred from the evangelistically fruitful ground where the harvest was plentiful and the workers few, to a dry well in a barren land about 1,000 kilometers away. Walter, in his energetic, impulsive way, opposed the decision, but the conference leadership refused to reconsider. Frenchy, I won't let them do this to you. There's still so much we have to do here together. Who will finish the work in the city? It's fine. If my conference sends me, I must go, the gentle pastor said. But they wanted to stop you from doing this campaign before. They just want to get rid of you. How can you let them do this to you? Walter argued, with his arms waving and his face clearly revealing his indignation. My high priest hasn't had me flogged yet, came the calm answer from the wise preacher, which gave Walter something to chew on for a while. Suddenly, we were on our own, and Walter realized that he had to prepare more lectures than the few he had done together with his mentor. It turned out to indeed be God's plan to send our friend to what seemed like the end of the earth in order to guide Walter further in his unquenchable quest for truth. Within a few months, he had taken more slides for new lectures and was ready for his overseas trips, which he could take only during his university vacations. Out of the blue, he received articles and books in the post or from people he had never seen before, and he gathered information for his varied topics daily until his mustard seed grew into a large tree. At the university, his work for God was also expanding rapidly. An agronomist from a large experimental farm at Stellenbosch approached him to help them solve the mystery of skew leg syndrome in sheep, and the astounding results of the research done by him and his students revealed that the diet of the animals had a direct influence on their growth and health in general, contrary to what anyone believed at that time. Soon, Walter had his students working on different research projects, which, to the dismay of all except himself, proved that it was the added animal products in the feed that caused and aggravated most of the major illnesses. But at the same time, Walter now had the opportunity and incentive to test scientifically every statement written on health by the 19th century pioneer Ellen G. White, and it proved to him that her health advice some 150 years earlier was so far beyond her time that it could only have been written through divine revelation. In his mercy, God tried to protect his people against the ever-increasing diseases by revealing to them what was safe to eat and what not. The Israelites didn't believe him on their way to Canaan almost 1,500 years BC. So why should they believe him in the 20th century, where man had become so sophisticated and educated? Besides, who today believes we're on our way to a heavenly Canaan anyway? Luke 17 verse 26. And as it was in the days of Noe, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. Verse 27. They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage, until the day that Noe entered into the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Verse 28. Likewise, also as it was in the days of Lot, they did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. Verse 29. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Verse 30. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. The end of chapter 8 of Dwelling in the Secret Place.